Sarah Martinez had never planned to become a legend. At 26, she was simply a registered nurse working the night shift at Metropolitan General Hospital, the kind of place where gunshot wounds arrived hourly, and hope seemed as scarce as clean linens. Her colleagues knew her as the quiet one who always volunteered for extra shifts, the woman who somehow managed to smile even during the worst emergencies. The rain hammered against the hospital windows that October evening, creating rivulets that looked like tears streaming down glass. Sarah adjusted her stethoscope and checked her watch, 11:47 p.m. 3 hours into her shift, and the emergency department had already seen 2 overdoses, a domestic violence case, and a car accident victim who wouldn't stop asking for his mother. Martinez, room 7 needs vitals, called Dr. Rebecca Chun from across the bustling corridor. The emergency department never truly slept, but nights like these made it feel like a war zone. Sarah nodded, grabbing her blood pressure cuff and heading toward the indicated room. Room 7 housed Marcus Williams, a 22-year-old who had been brought in after collapsing at a construction site. His supervisor had found him unconscious near a pile of steel beams, no obvious injuries, but complaining of severe headaches and blurred vision. As Sarah entered the room, she noticed immediately how young he looked, barely older than her youngest brother. "How are you feeling, Marcus?" she asked, her voice carrying the gentle authority she had developed over 5 years of nursing. She began taking his blood pressure, noting the slight tremor in his hands. "Like someone's hitting my head with a hammer," Marcus mumbled, squinting against the fluorescent lights. "And everything's fuzzy. Real fuzzy." Sarah frowned as she read the blood pressure monitor, 180/110. Dangerously high for someone his age. She checked his pupils with a small flashlight, noting they were unequal in size. These weren't good signs. As she continued her assessment, Marcus suddenly grabbed her wrist. "Nurse," he whispered, his voice urgent despite his obvious pain. "There's something I gotta tell you. Something important." Sarah paused, recognizing the tone. In her years of nursing, she had learned to distinguish between rambling and genuine urgency. This felt like the latter. "What is it, Marcus?" He looked around the room nervously, as if checking for listening ears. "I work construction, right? But not just any construction. We've been working on this government building downtown. Real hush-hush stuff. Security clearance and everything." Sarah continued taking his pulse while listening. Sometimes patients shared random details when they were scared or in pain, but something in Marcus's manner made her pay attention. "Yesterday, we found something," Marcus continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Hidden in the foundation. Old stuff. Real old. And there were papers with it. Military papers." He winced as another wave of pain hit him. Sarah made a mental note to inform Dr. Chun about the elevated blood pressure immediately. "Papers about what, Marcus?" "About nurses. Military nurses from way back. Vietnam, I think. But here's the weird part. There was this list of code names. Angel 1, Angel 2, all the way up to Angel 12. And there were descriptions next to each name." Sarah's hand stilled on his wrist. Something cold settled in her stomach. "When I read the description for Angel 9, Marcus whispered, it was like reading about you. Dark hair, brown eyes, small scar on the left hand, birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on the right shoulder." Without thinking, Sarah looked down at her left hand where a small scar ran across her knuckles, a childhood accident involving her father's workshop. Her right shoulder, hidden beneath her scrubs, bore exactly the birthmark Marcus had described. That's impossible," Sarah managed, but her voice sounded strange even to her own ears. "I thought so too," Marcus said. "But then I kept reading. The paper said Angel 9 would appear in 2023, would work night shifts at a major hospital, would have a gift for saving people that others couldn't save." Sarah felt the room spinning slightly. This was ridiculous. Marcus was obviously confused, possibly suffering from a head injury that was causing delusions. "Marcus, you need to rest. Head injuries can cause—" "Wait," Marcus interrupted, pulling something from his pocket. It was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. "I took a picture with my phone before the foreman locked everything up again." With shaking hands, he showed Sarah his phone screen. The image was grainy, but she could make out what appeared to be a military document dated 1971. At the top, it read, "Classified, Project Guardian Angel, Medical Operatives." Below that was a list, and Sarah's breath caught as she read. Angel 9, operative designation. SM physical characteristics. Female, 5 feet 6 inches, dark brown hair, brown eyes. Distinguishing marks include linear scar left hand dorsal surface, crescent-shaped birthmark right shoulder posterior. Temporal assignment. Active duty commences October 2023, Metropolitan General Hospital, night shift operations. Special capabilities. Enhanced intuitive medical assessment. Unusually high patient survival rates, particularly in cases deemed hopeless by standard medical evaluation. The phone slipped from Marcus's hand as he groaned in pain. Sarah caught it automatically, but her mind was reeling. Everything matched. Everything. This can't be real, she whispered. That's what I thought, Marcus said weakly. But then, I remembered something. My grandfather used to tell stories about Vietnam. He was a medic there. Always talked about these nurses who seemed to have supernatural abilities. Said they could save soldiers that should have died, that they appeared at exactly the right moment, like they knew where they were needed. Sarah's hands were trembling now. Her grandmother had been a nurse during Vietnam, but she had never talked about her service. Never. Every time Sarah had asked about those years, her grandmother would change the subject or find a sudden need to be somewhere else. Marcus, where exactly did you find this document? Foundation of the Federal Building on 5th Street. We were doing seismic retrofitting. The document was in a metal case, waterproofed, like someone wanted to make sure it survived. Sarah's mind raced. The Federal Building on 5th Street was only 6 blocks from the hospital. It had been built in the late 1970s, just a few years after the document was dated. Suddenly, the monitors in Marcus's room began beeping frantically. His blood pressure had spiked even higher, and his pulse was becoming irregular. Sarah immediately pressed the call button for Dr. Chin. Marcus, stay with me, Sarah said, switching into full medical mode. But, as she worked to stabilize him, she couldn't shake what she had just learned. Dr. Chin arrived with the crash cart team. What's his status? BP spiking to 190/120, irregular pulse, pupils still unequal, Sarah reported efficiently. But her mind kept returning to that document, to the impossible accuracy of its predictions. As the medical team worked on Marcus, Sarah found herself thinking about her career. It was true that she had an unusual success rate with critical patients. Other nurses had commented on it, jokingly calling her the miracle worker or saying she had a sixth sense about which patients were about to take a turn for the worse. She had always attributed it to good training and careful observation. But now she remembered specific instances that had puzzled even her. The night she had inexplicably checked on a patient who seemed stable, only to find him in cardiac arrest. The time she had insisted on additional blood work for a patient with seemingly minor symptoms, which revealed a hidden condition that would have killed him within hours. Sarah, Dr. Chin called, pulling her from her thoughts. We're moving Marcus to ICU. Can you get him prepped for transport? As Sarah worked to prepare Marcus for the move, he grabbed her hand one more time. Angel 9, he whispered so quietly only she could hear. My grandfather said they were real, said they were sent to save people. But he also said, he paused, struggling to speak through his pain. Said what? Said they never knew what they were until someone told them. Before Sarah could respond, the transport team arrived to move Marcus to the ICU. She watched as they wheeled him away, her mind spinning with questions she couldn't answer. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. She went through the motions of patient care, but part of her mind kept returning to that document, to the impossible specificity of its details. How could someone in 1971 have known where she would be working in 2023? How could they have known about scars and birthmarks she had been born with? During her break at 4 a.m., Sarah found herself in the hospital library, searching online for any information about Project Guardian Angel or military medical programs from the Vietnam era. She found mentions of various classified programs, but nothing specific about angels or nurses with supernatural abilities. She was about to give up when she found an obscure academic paper about anomalous medical phenomena in combat zones. The paper, written by a retired Army psychiatrist, mentioned numerous reports from Vietnam of medical personnel who displayed statistically impossible success rates and predictive capabilities regarding patient outcomes. The paper quoted several veterans who described nurses who seemed to appear at exactly the right moment, who could diagnose conditions that other medical staff missed, who rarely lost patients even in the most dire circumstances. The veterans called them angels, and many believed they were somehow more than human. Sarah closed the laptop, her hands shaking. Everything was pointing towards something impossible, something that challenged everything she understood about reality. As she walked back toward the emergency department, she passed the ICU and decided to check on Marcus. The nurse at the ICU desk told her he had stabilized but was asking for her specifically. When she entered his room, Marcus was awake and looking more alert than he had hours earlier. "You came back," he said weakly. "How are you feeling?" "Better. The doctors say it was some kind of allergic reaction that caused brain swelling. They caught it just in time." He looked at her intently. "Just in time because of you. You knew something was wrong before the test showed it." Sarah started to object, but Marcus continued. "I've been thinking about what my grandfather told me. He said the angels didn't just save people randomly. He said they were drawn to specific situations, specific people who were meant to survive for a reason. Marcus, I'm going to be okay because of you. But I think there's a reason I found that document, a reason I met you tonight. I think someone wants you to know what you are." Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I'm just a nurse, Marcus. I'm not anything special." "That's what they all believed," Marcus said softly, until they realized they were wrong. As Sarah left the ICU, she made a decision. She was going to find out the truth about that document, about Project Guardian Angel, and about whether she was somehow connected to something larger than herself. The morning sun was beginning to rise over the city as Sarah finished her shift. She had spent the last hour of her shift researching everything she could find about the federal building on 5th Street. Construction records showed that the building had indeed been erected on the site of a previous structure, a military administrative building that had been demolished in 1976. As she walked to her car, Sarah found herself taking a detour that led past 5th Street. The federal building stood imposing against the morning sky, its concrete facade giving no hint of the secrets that might lie buried in its foundation. She thought about Marcus's grandfather and his stories of angel nurses in Vietnam. She thought about her own grandmother, who had served as a military nurse during that same period and had never spoken about her experiences. Most of all, she thought about the document that had described her with impossible accuracy. By the time Sarah reached her apartment, she had made another decision. She was going to visit her grandmother. If there were answers to be found, they would start with the one person who had been there, who had served as a military nurse during the exact time period mentioned in that mysterious document. As she fell asleep that morning, Sarah's dreams were filled with images of nurses in military fatigues, moving through jungle hospitals like guardian spirits, saving lives that couldn't be saved. In her dreams, she saw her own face among them, and for the first time in her life, it didn't seem impossible. The next evening would bring new revelations, new questions, and the beginning of a journey that would change everything Sarah thought she knew about herself and her purpose. But for now, she slept, and in her sleep, she dreamed of angels. Sarah woke at sunset, her mind immediately returning to the events of the previous night. The document Marcus had shown her felt like a dream, but the image was burned into her memory with crystal clarity. She reached for her phone and found 3 missed calls from her supervisor and a text message that made her stomach drop. "Sarah, need you to come in early tonight. Major emergency situation developing. All hands needed. Linda." As she quickly showered and dressed, Sarah's thoughts kept returning to her plan to visit her grandmother. That would have to wait. Whatever was happening at the hospital took priority. The drive to Metropolitan General revealed the magnitude of the emergency. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the darkening sky. Police barricades had been set up around the hospital perimeter, and she could see officers directing traffic away from the main entrance. Sarah parked in the staff lot and jogged toward the employee entrance, where she found chaos unlike anything she had experienced in her 5 years at the hospital. Linda, her supervisor, spotted her immediately. "Thank God you're here," Linda said, her usually calm demeanor cracked with stress. "We've got a situation unlike anything we've ever dealt with." "What happened?" "Chemical spill at the port. Some kind of industrial accident involving a transport ship. We've got 43 victims coming in, and preliminary reports suggest exposure to an unknown compound." Linda handed Sarah a hazmat suit. The CDC is en route, but we're flying blind until they can identify what we're dealing with. As Sarah suited up, she noticed other staff members moving with the kind of controlled urgency that came with true emergencies. The normal sounds of the hospital had been replaced by the constant chatter of emergency communications and the hum of additional equipment being wheeled into position. "What are the symptoms presenting?" Sarah asked as she adjusted her protective gear. "That's the problem," Linda replied grimly. "They're all over the map. Some victims are presenting with respiratory distress, others with neurological symptoms. Some have skin reactions, others are showing signs of internal bleeding. It's like the compound affects different people in completely different ways." The first ambulance arrived as Sarah finished her preparations. She was assigned to triage, which meant she would be the first medical professional to assess each victim and determine the priority of their treatment. The first victim off the ambulance was a dock worker named Jim Henley, a man in his 50s who was conscious but struggling to breathe. As Sarah began her assessment, she noticed something strange. While his breathing was labored, his vital signs didn't match the severity of his distress. Her instincts told her there was something else going on. "Jim, can you tell me exactly what happened?" Sarah asked as she worked. "There was this container," Jim gasped between breaths. "Fell off the crane, broke open. Green mist everywhere. People started dropping like flies." Sarah continued her assessment, but something felt wrong. Not wrong with Jim's condition, but wrong with her own perceptions. She found herself knowing things about his condition that she shouldn't be able to determine from a basic triage examination. "You're going to be okay, Jim," she heard herself saying with absolute certainty. "The breathing difficulty is going to peak in about 20 minutes, then gradually improve. But we need to watch your kidney function over the next 6 hours." Dr. Chin appeared at her shoulder. "What's your assessment?" "Priority 2, Sarah said automatically. "Respiratory involvement, but stable vitals. Recommend monitoring for delayed kidney toxicity." "Based on what clinical indication?" Sarah paused. She had no clinical basis for the kidney concern. It had simply felt like knowledge that appeared in her mind. "Intuition," she offered weakly. Dr. Chin nodded and moved on to the next patient. But Sarah noticed her writing, "Monitor renal function," on Jim's chart. The next victim was Maria Santos, a young woman who worked in the port office. She had been further from the spill but was presenting with severe neurological symptoms, confusion, visual disturbances, and tremors. As Sarah began her assessment, the same strange sense of knowing washed over her. She found herself understanding Maria's condition in a way that went beyond normal medical training. "Maria, I need you to focus on my voice," Sarah said, taking the woman's hand. "You're experiencing temporary neurological effects, but they're going to resolve completely. No permanent damage." "How do you know?" Maria asked through her confusion. Sarah didn't have an answer. She just knew. Over the next 3 hours, 43 victims passed through her triage station. With each patient, the phenomenon grew stronger. Sarah found herself making assessments and predictions with uncanny accuracy. She correctly identified which patients would develop delayed symptoms, which ones would recover quickly, and which ones needed immediate intervention for problems that hadn't yet manifested. Dr. Chin pulled her aside during a brief lull. "Sarah, I need to ask you something. How are you making these calls?" "What do you mean?" "Your triage decisions tonight have been remarkable. 15 patients you flagged for kidney monitoring have developed renal symptoms. 3 patients you marked for neurological observation are showing delayed brain involvement. You correctly predicted which patients would develop respiratory complications hours before they manifested." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "I'm just reading the signs carefully." "What signs?" "Most of these patients showed no indication of the complications you predicted. Yet you've been right every single time." Before Sarah could respond, commotion erupted near the ambulance bay. The CDC team had arrived, and they were setting up a mobile laboratory to analyze samples from the chemical spill. Dr. Patricia Winters, the CDC epidemiologist leading the team, briefed the medical staff on their preliminary findings. "We've identified the compound as a derivative of Agent Orange, modified with synthetic compounds we've never seen before," Dr. Winters announced. "The good news is that most effects appear to be temporary. The bad news is that we have no established treatment protocols." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. Agent Orange. Her grandmother's war. The connection felt too strong to be coincidental. As the CDC team worked, Sarah continued treating patients. But now she was paying careful attention to her own thought processes, trying to understand where her knowledge was coming from. With patient after patient, information seemed to flow into her consciousness without any logical source. She knew which treatments would work, which patients were hiding symptoms out of fear, and which ones were experiencing delayed reactions that wouldn't show up on standard tests for hours. Around midnight, Dr. Winters approached Sarah's station. "Nurse Martinez, I've been reviewing your triage notes. Your accuracy rate tonight is statistically impossible." "Excuse me. You've made 43 treatment recommendations based on triage assessments." 43. You've been correct in every single case, including predicting delayed symptoms that our models suggest should be unpredictable. Dr. Winters studied Sarah intently. "I've never seen anything like it. I've just been observing carefully." "No," Dr. Winters interrupted. "This goes beyond careful observation. You've been predicting physiological responses to a completely unknown chemical compound with perfect accuracy. That's not medically possible." Sarah felt exposed, as if Dr. Winters could see something she was trying to hide, even though she didn't fully understand what was happening herself. "Doctor, I really can't explain. Have you ever been exposed to Agent Orange or its derivatives?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Not that I know of." "What about your family? Parents? Grandparents?" Sarah's throat felt dry. "My grandmother was a nurse in Vietnam." Dr. Winters' expression changed immediately. She pulled Sarah aside, away from the other staff members. "This is going to sound strange, but there were reports during the Vietnam War of medical personnel who developed unusual diagnostic abilities after exposure to chemical agents. The reports were classified and largely dismissed as stress-related phenomena." "What kind of abilities?" "Enhanced pattern recognition. Ability to predict patient outcomes with unusual accuracy. Some reports suggested these individuals could sense physiological changes before they became clinically apparent." Sarah's mind raced back to the document Marcus had shown her. Project Guardian Angel. "These reports," Sarah said carefully, "were they ever investigated?" "There were rumors of a classified study, something called Project Guardian Angel. But the records were sealed, and most of the participants never spoke about their experiences." The conversation was interrupted by an emergency call from the ICU. One of the chemical spill victims, a man named David Park, was crashing. Sarah followed Dr. Winters toward the ICU, but as they walked, she felt a strange pulling sensation, as if something was drawing her in a different direction. "Dr. Winters," Sarah said suddenly, "David Park isn't the one in immediate danger." "What are you talking about?" "He's the one coding. Check on Maria Santos. Room 314. She's about to go into respiratory arrest. Dr. Winters looked at Sarah as if she had lost her mind. "Maria was stable when I last checked. No indication of respiratory involvement. Please, just check." Something in Sarah's voice must have convinced her, because Dr. Winters diverted toward room 314. They arrived to find Maria Santos struggling to breathe, her oxygen saturation dropping rapidly. "How did you know?" Dr. Winters demanded as she worked to stabilize Maria. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "I just felt it." As the medical team worked on Maria, Sarah found herself knowing exactly which interventions would work and which wouldn't. She watched herself providing guidance that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her medical training. "Try 40% oxygen, not 100%, she heard herself saying. "And check her potassium levels. They're going to be critically low." The blood test results confirmed abnormally low potassium, and the adjusted oxygen therapy worked perfectly. Maria stabilized quickly. Dr. Winters pulled Sarah into a private consultation room. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Have you ever experienced anything like this before?" Sarah thought about all the times her colleagues had joked about her sixth sense, all the patients she had saved by following hunches that couldn't be explained medically. "Yes," she admitted quietly, "but never this strong, never this clear. I think exposure to this chemical compound may have triggered something in you. Something genetic, possibly related to your grandmother's service in Vietnam." "That sounds crazy." "A lot of things sound crazy until we understand them," Dr. Winters said. "There's something you should know. I've spent my career studying the long-term effects of chemical exposure on military personnel. There have been documented cases of genetic modifications that can be passed down through generations." Sarah felt the room spinning. You're saying my grandmother's exposure to Agent Orange could have affected me? I'm saying it's possible. And if that's the case, tonight's exposure to this compound might have activated dormant capabilities. Before Sarah could process this fully, her phone rang. The display showed a number she didn't recognize, but something compelled her to answer. Hello, Sarah Martinez? The voice was elderly, female, and somehow familiar. Yes, this is Margaret Chun, Dr. Rebecca Chin's grandmother. Rebecca told me about what happened tonight, about your abilities. I think it's time we talked. I'm sorry, I don't understand. I served with your grandmother in Vietnam. I know about Project Guardian Angel. And I know what's happening to you. Sarah's legs felt weak. How did you? Because it happened to me too, child. 50 years ago. And now it's your turn. The call ended, leaving Sarah staring at her phone in shock. Dr. Winters was watching her with growing concern. Sarah? What is it? I think I'm about to get some answers. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of medical emergencies and patients who somehow seemed to stabilize under Sarah's care with unusual speed and efficiency. By the time her shift ended, word had spread throughout the hospital about the nurse in emergency who had somehow predicted every complication from the chemical spill with perfect accuracy. As Sarah changed out of her scrubs, she found a note in her locker. It contained only an address and the words, "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Come alone. Time for truth." M. Chun. Walking to her car in the early morning light, Sarah realized that everything in her life was about to change. The document Marcus had found, the events of tonight, the phone call from Dr. Chen's grandmother, it was all connected to something much larger than she had imagined. But, as she drove home, she also realized something else. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The thought should have been comforting, but, instead, it filled her with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Tomorrow would bring answers, but she had a feeling those answers would lead to questions she wasn't prepared to face. The address led Sarah to a modest house in the suburban hills, where autumn leaves carpeted the front yard in shades of gold and crimson. Margaret Chun answered the door before Sarah could knock, as if she had been watching from the window. At 81, Margaret moved with surprising grace, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and her dark eyes sharp with intelligence. She studied Sarah for a long moment before stepping aside to let her enter. "You look just like her," Margaret said softly, leading Sarah into a living room that felt frozen in time. Military commendations hung on the walls alongside black and white photographs of nurses in combat fatigues. "Like who?" "Your grandmother. Elena. You have her eyes, her presence." Margaret gestured for Sarah to sit in a worn leather chair. "She always said you would come eventually." Sarah's breath caught. "My grandmother told you about me?" "She told me many things before she died. But first, let me show you something." Margaret disappeared into another room and returned carrying a wooden box that looked military in origin. She set it on the coffee table between them and opened it carefully. Inside were documents, photographs, and medals that Sarah had never seen before. But what caught her attention immediately was a photograph of 12 nurses standing in front of a field hospital. Her grandmother stood in the center, and written across the bottom in faded ink were the words, "Guardian Angels, Thieu Chi Base, 1971. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered, picking up the photograph. "My grandmother never talked about Vietnam. She always said she worked in a regular hospital." "She lied to protect you," Margaret said gently. "We all did. We were sworn to secrecy about Project Guardian Angel until the day we died. But you're telling me now." "Because Elena asked me to. Before she passed, she made me promise that if anything ever happened to activate your abilities, I would tell you the truth." Margaret pulled out another document. She knew this day would come. The document was a letter written in her grandmother's familiar handwriting, dated just 6 months before her death. Sarah's hands trembled as she read. "My dearest Sarah, if Margaret is showing you this letter, then what I have feared and hoped for has finally happened. The abilities that were passed to me, and through me to you, have awakened. You are experiencing things you cannot explain, knowing things you should not know. You are afraid, confused, and probably convinced you are losing your mind. You are not. What happened to us in Vietnam was not natural, but it was not evil either. We were changed by circumstances beyond our control, given gifts that came with a terrible price. We saved lives that could not be saved, but we also bore the burden of knowledge we could not share. You are the 9th generation of what the military called guardian angels. There have been others before you, and there will be others after. Margaret will explain what this means, but know this: you are not alone, you are not crazy, and you are exactly who you were meant to be. Sarah looked up to find Margaret watching her with compassionate eyes. 9 generations? Sarah managed to ask. The program began during the Civil War, Margaret explained. Nurses who developed unusual diagnostic abilities after exposure to battlefield conditions. The military studied it, tried to replicate it, and eventually realized it wasn't something that could be created artificially. Margaret pulled out more photographs, showing nurses from different wars, different eras. Each had the same focused intensity in their eyes that Sarah recognized from looking at herself in mirrors lately. It appears randomly, usually in women with a specific genetic marker. The military has been tracking the bloodlines for over a century, waiting for the next activation. Tracking bloodlines? That sounds sinister? Yes, it does. But not for the reasons you might think. Margaret leaned forward. Sarah, do you know what your success rate is with critical patients? Sarah shrugged. Better than average, I suppose. 97%. In 5 years of nursing, you have lost exactly 8 patients. The national average for emergency nurses is 63% success rate with critical cases. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had never calculated her statistics, had never wanted to think about the patients she couldn't save. That's not possible. It is when you're an angel. We don't just treat symptoms, Sarah. We see the pattern of disease, the trajectory of healing, the moment when a life hangs in the balance. We know things that medical science hasn't discovered yet. Margaret showed her more documents from the project files. Reports of nurses who could predict heart attacks hours before they occurred, who could diagnose cancers before tumors were visible on scans, who could guide surgical procedures with uncanny precision. What happened to them all? They served their purpose and, then, returned to normal lives. The abilities fade without regular exposure to the specific conditions that trigger them. Margaret's expression grew sad. Your grandmother's abilities faded after Vietnam. She lived 40 years as a regular person. But mine are getting stronger. Because the compound you were exposed to last night was derived from the same chemicals that created the angels in the first place. Someone has been experimenting with synthetic versions. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Someone is deliberately creating this chemical? We believe so. The spill last night wasn't an accident, Sarah. It was a field test. Before Sarah could process this information fully, Margaret's phone rang. She answered with a sharp yes, and her face immediately grew grave. We have a problem, she said after ending the call. That was Dr. Winters from the CDC. 3 more chemical incidents have occurred in different cities. Chicago, Denver, and Miami. Same compound, same symptoms. More field tests. Or something worse. The pattern suggests someone is trying to activate multiple angels simultaneously. Margaret moved to her computer and pulled up a secure interface that looked far more sophisticated than anything Sarah would have expected in an elderly woman's home. I maintained my clearance after retirement, Margaret explained, noticing Sarah's surprise. Someone needed to monitor for new activations. The computer screen showed a map of the United States with red dots marking the chemical incidents. But what made Sarah's blood run cold were the blue dots scattered across the country. What are the blue dots? Potential angels. Women with the genetic markers who could be activated by exposure. Margaret pointed to the screen. Before last night, there were 47 potential angels in the United States. Today, that number has dropped to 43. Meaning 4 women were exposed and activated. Meaning 4 women are experiencing exactly what you experienced last night. Enhanced diagnostic abilities, predictive insights, the ability to save patients who shouldn't survive. Sarah stared at the map, trying to process the implications. Why would someone want to activate multiple angels? Margaret's expression grew grim. Because they're planning something that's going to require unusual medical intervention on a large scale. The computer chimed with an incoming message. Margaret read it quickly, her face paling. Sarah, we need to go. Now. What's happening? Emergency alert from Homeland Security. There's been an incident at a research facility in Nevada. They're requesting immediate medical support from personnel with specialized diagnostic capabilities. They're asking for angels specifically? They're asking for us. Within an hour, Sarah found herself on a military transport plane alongside Margaret and two other women she had never met but who shared the same intense, focused energy she was beginning to recognize in herself. Dr. Lisa Park from Chicago was a trauma surgeon who had been activated during the chemical incident there. She described experiencing the same predictive abilities that Sarah had developed. Nurse Rachel Adams from Miami had been working in an ICU when her hospital treated victims from the chemical spill in that city. Like Sarah, she had found herself knowing things about her patients that she couldn't explain medically. As the plane flew west, Margaret briefed them on what they might encounter. The facility in Nevada is a classified medical research installation. They've been working on bioweapons countermeasures for the past decade. Something went wrong during a test 3 hours ago. What kind of test? Dr. Park asked. They were trying to synthesize a neutralizing agent for a weaponized pathogen. The test subjects were volunteer military personnel who had been exposed to the pathogen under controlled conditions. Rachel leaned forward. And something went wrong with the neutralizing agent. The pathogen mutated. It's now resistant to all known treatments, and it's spreading faster than projected. 14 soldiers are infected, and conventional medical intervention has failed. Sarah felt that familiar pulling sensation, the same feeling that had told her to check on Maria Santos the night before. How long do we have? According to the projections, if we can't stop this outbreak within 6 hours, it will breach containment. Within 12 hours, it could reach the nearest populated area. The plane began its descent toward a military airfield in the Nevada desert. Sarah looked out the window at the harsh landscape below and wondered how her life had changed so dramatically in less than 24 hours. But as they landed and were rushed to the research facility, she also felt something she had never experienced before: absolute certainty about her purpose. Whatever was happening at that facility, whatever had gone wrong with the medical experiment, she knew she was meant to be there. The facility was a sprawling complex of concrete buildings surrounded by multiple layers of security fencing. Military vehicles and personnel were everywhere, and Sarah could see the tension in every soldier's face. Dr. Amanda Torres, the facility's chief medical officer, met them at the entrance. She looked exhausted and desperate. "Thank God you're here," she said, leading them quickly through security checkpoints. "We've lost 2 patients in the last hour, and the remaining 12 are deteriorating rapidly." "What exactly are we dealing with?" Margaret asked as they walked. "A modified hemorrhagic fever virus that attacks the cardiovascular and nervous systems simultaneously. We've tried every antiviral, every supportive measure we know. Nothing is working." They reached the isolation ward, where Sarah could see the infected soldiers through reinforced glass windows. Even from a distance, she could sense their conditions, their trajectories, the particular way this pathogen was attacking their systems. "Dr. Torres," Sarah said suddenly, "the antiviral treatments you've been using, they're making it worse." "That's impossible. These are proven protocols for normal hemorrhagic fevers. This pathogen feeds off the immune response triggered by those antivirals." Dr. Torres stared at her. "How could you possibly know that?" Sarah couldn't explain it, but she could see the pattern as clearly as if it were written in the air. The virus wasn't just resistant to treatment. It was using the treatments as fuel for its own replication. "We need to stop all antiviral medications immediately," Rachel said, apparently seeing the same pattern Sarah was seeing. "And begin supportive care focused on cellular regeneration rather than immune system activation," Dr. Park added. Margaret smiled grimly. "Welcome to being angels, ladies. Now let's go save some lives." As they entered the isolation ward, Sarah felt her abilities expanding beyond anything she had experienced before. She could sense not just the condition of each patient, but the specific way the pathogen was affecting their individual systems. Patient by patient, they began implementing treatments that defied conventional medical wisdom, but followed the patterns only they could see. And one by one, the soldiers began to stabilize. But as they worked, Sarah became aware of something else, a presence watching them, studying their methods with intense interest. Someone had orchestrated all of this. The chemical spills, the activation of the angels, the convenient biological disaster that required their specific abilities. They were being tested, evaluated, prepared for something larger. The question was, by whom, and for what purpose? As the last patient stabilized and The immediate crisis passed. Sarah realized that solving this mystery had become the most important mission of her life. Because if someone was manipulating angels for their own agenda, then every life she saved might be part of a larger plan that could threaten thousands more. 3 days after the Nevada incident, Sarah found herself in a situation she never could have imagined. She sat in a secure conference room in an undisclosed government facility, surrounded by people whose very existence challenged everything she thought she knew about the world. Margaret sat to her right. But the elderly woman who had seemed like someone's grandmother was now clearly revealed as something much more. Her military bearing was unmistakable, and the deference shown to her by high-ranking officials made it clear that Margaret Chen was far more than a retired nurse. Across the table sat General Patricia Reeves, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Next to her was Dr. Michael Harrison, identified only as Director of Special Projects for a department Sarah had never heard of. Ms. Martinez, General Reeves began, what you experienced in Nevada was not an isolated incident. It was, in fact, the culmination of a 20-year operation to identify and activate the remaining guardian angels. You're saying you deliberately exposed us to those chemicals? We're saying we allowed events to unfold that would reveal your true capabilities, Dr. Harrison interjected smoothly. The chemical spills were real emergencies that required real solutions. We simply ensured that the right people were in position to provide those solutions. Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. You manipulated medical emergencies to test us. We prevented catastrophes by ensuring the most qualified individuals were available to respond, General Reeves said firmly. The bioweapon outbreak in Nevada would have killed thousands if conventional medical protocols had been followed. Your intervention saved not just those 14 soldiers, but potentially hundreds of thousands of civilians. Margaret leaned forward. Sarah, there's something else you need to understand. The threat we're facing now is unlike anything the guardian angels have encountered before. Dr. Harrison activated a large display screen that showed satellite imagery of various locations around the globe. Red zones marked areas of concern, and Sarah could see patterns of infection spreading across multiple continents. 6 months ago, our intelligence services detected the emergence of a new type of biological weapon. Not a single pathogen, but a collection of engineered viruses designed to work in conjunction with each other. The display shifted to show microscopic images of various viral structures, each more complex than anything Sarah had seen in her medical training. They call it the Hydra Protocol, General Reeves continued. Multiple pathogen strains that can be released independently but are designed to combine into something exponentially more deadly when they encounter each other in the same host. Sarah studied the images, and even without her enhanced abilities, she could see the diabolical nature of the design. Each individual virus might cause manageable symptoms, but when they combined, they would create a cascade of biological failure that would overwhelm any immune system. Who created this? That's classified, Dr. Harrison said. What's not classified is that we have intelligence suggesting the first coordinated release is planned for within the next week. Margaret pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a map of major metropolitan areas around the world. Each was marked with complex data overlays showing population density, transportation hubs, and medical facility capacity. The projected casualties from a successful Hydra Protocol deployment range from 5 to 50 million people, depending on the scope of the initial release, Margaret explained. Sarah felt the room spinning. And you think 4 guardian angels can stop something like that? We think 4 guardian angels, working in coordination with the best medical and military minds in the world, might be able to develop countermeasures that conventional medicine cannot, General Reeves said. There's something else, Dr. Harrison added, pulling up another display. We've identified the activation pattern for guardian angel abilities. The specific genetic markers, the environmental triggers, the progression of enhanced capabilities. The screen showed complex genetic sequences alongside brain-skin imagery that demonstrated unusual neural activity patterns. What we've discovered is that guardian angels don't just have enhanced diagnostic abilities. In the right conditions, with the right training, your capabilities extend far beyond what we previously understood. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? Margaret answered. You can do more than predict patient outcomes, Sarah. You can influence them. You can guide healing processes at the cellular level. You can, in essence, reprogram biological systems to resist diseases that should be fatal. That's impossible, is it? How did you know that antiviral medications would make the Nevada pathogen worse? How did you know exactly which treatments would work for each individual patient? How did you sense Maria Santos going into respiratory arrest before any monitors detected the problem? Sarah thought back to those moments, remembering the certainty she had felt, the knowledge that had seemed to flow into her consciousness from an unknown source. Even if what you're saying is true, for people can't treat millions of patients. No, General Reeves agreed. But for people can develop a treatment protocol that millions of medical professionals can implement. For people can identify the specific intervention points that will allow conventional medicine to succeed where it would otherwise fail. Dr. Harrison pulled up another display showing the other 3 activated guardian angels. Sarah could see real-time medical data from each of them, demonstrating that their abilities were continuing to develop and strengthen. Dr. Park in Chicago has successfully treated 3 cases of antibiotic-resistant tuberculosis using techniques she developed through her enhanced diagnostic abilities. Nurse Adams in Miami has identified a pattern of early intervention that has increased survival rates for cardiac emergencies by 40%. And you, Ms. Martinez, haven't lost a single critical patient since your activation. The point is, Margaret said, your abilities are evolving. You're becoming more than enhanced diagnosticians. You're becoming healers in ways that medical science doesn't yet understand. Sarah stood up abruptly, needing to move, to process what she was being told. This is insane. You're asking me to believe that I have some kind of supernatural healing powers. We're asking you to believe what you've already experienced, General Reeves said gently. And we're asking you to help us prepare for a threat that could devastate human civilization. The room fell silent as Sarah paced, trying to reconcile what she was being told with her understanding of reality. But as she thought about the past few days, about the patients she had saved and the knowledge that had seemed to come from nowhere, she had to admit that conventional explanations weren't sufficient. If I agree to this, what exactly are you asking me to do? Join a team of the most advanced medical and scientific minds in the world, Dr. Harrison explained. Work with the other guardian angels to develop countermeasures for the Hydra protocol. Use your enhanced abilities to find solutions that conventional research cannot. And if we succeed? If you succeed, you save millions of lives and prevent a biological catastrophe that could set human civilization back decades. And if we fail? Margaret met her eyes across the table. If we fail, the world changes forever. And not in ways any of us want to contemplate. Sarah returned to her seat, her decision crystallizing as she thought about all the patients she had treated, all the lives that had been saved through her intervention. I need to know one thing, she said finally. Are there others? Other angels who weren't activated by your chemical incidents? Dr. Harrison and General Reeves exchanged glances. Yes, Dr. Harrison admitted. We've identified approximately 23 individuals worldwide who carry the genetic markers but haven't been activated. And the people behind the Hydra protocol, do they know about guardian angels? This time the silence stretched longer. We believe so, General Reeves said finally. We believe the timing of their planned attack is specifically designed to occur before we could fully activate and deploy guardian angel capabilities. Sarah understood. They weren't just in a race against a biological weapon. They were in a race against an enemy who knew exactly what they were capable of and was trying to strike before they could reach their full potential. How long do we have? 72 hours until the projected first release. 2 weeks until our intelligence suggests they'll deploy the full protocol. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of people who were asking her to step into a role she never could have imagined, to use abilities she barely understood, to save people she would never meet. But as she thought about Marcus Williams, about the chemical spill victims, about the soldiers in Nevada who would have died without guardian angel intervention, she realized the choice had already been made the moment she decided to become a nurse. What do we do first? General Reeves smiled for the first time since Sarah had met her. First, we bring the 4 angels together in the same location. We've found that your abilities are enhanced when you work in proximity to each other. And then we attempt something that has never been tried before. We're going to use guardian angel abilities to reverse engineer biological weapons and develop countermeasures in real time. Margaret leaned forward. Sarah, what we're asking of you will push your abilities beyond anything previous angels have attempted. The process is dangerous, both to you and potentially to the patients we'll be working with. What kind of danger? Using your abilities at this level could burn them out permanently. You could lose your enhanced capabilities entirely, or worse. Worse how? Dr. Harrison answered grimly. Previous attempts to push guardian angel abilities beyond their natural limits have resulted in psychological fragmentation. The enhanced pattern recognition that makes you effective can become overwhelming if it's not properly controlled. Sarah considered this, thinking about the intensity of the experiences she had already had, the way information seemed to flood into her consciousness during medical emergencies. But, without attempting this, millions of people die? Yes. Sarah stood up again, this time with purpose and determination. Then, we attempt it. When do we start? Immediately, General Reeves said. The other angels are already en route. We have a medical facility prepared where you'll work with some of the best minds in biological warfare defense. And the enemy? Do we know anything about them? We know they're well-funded, technologically advanced, and they've been planning this for years, Dr. Harrison said. We also know they're counting on conventional medicine being unable to respond effectively to their weapon. They didn't count on us, Sarah said, surprising herself with the confidence in her voice. No, Margaret said, standing to join her. They didn't count on the angels. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Less than a week ago, she had been a night shift nurse dealing with routine emergencies. Now she was preparing to save the world using abilities she still didn't fully understand. But, as they walked toward the transport that would take them to the secret facility, Sarah felt something she had never experienced before. Absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was born to do. The enemy had planned for everything except guardian angels. Now it was time to show them exactly what angels could do when they worked together. 3 hours later, as Sarah met the other angels and began the most important medical mission in human history, she thought about Marcus Williams and his grandfather's stories about supernatural nurses in Vietnam. The old soldier had been right about one thing: the angels were real. Now it was time to prove they were still watching over humanity.